Welcome to Relatively Famous, the podcast where we chat with relatives of famous people. I'm Chip White. My famous relative is Vanna White from Wheel of Fortune. And today I have such a cool guest. I'm so excited to have him on. I'm just going to say he's the brother of Shaun Cassidy because it would take me 15 minutes to go through the Cassidy dynasty. Let's welcome today Ryan Cassidy.
Relatively Famous podcast with Chip White.
Ryan, welcome and thank you for being a guest on Relatively Famous. The Cassidy name goes back generations, even in my family. My mom and dad were fans of your dad, Jack, and your mom, Shirley. I was a Partridge Family fan. I actually loved the music, but I loved Susan Day a little more. She was cute. And Shaun, his music kind of came into my life when I was DJing. And Patrick is actually friends with my sister, and they were kind of friends at Hollywood parties. And I'm excited to meet you. Let's welcome Ryan Cassidy.
Thanks for having me, Chip. I appreciate it. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. And now your name covers a lot, but I want to know more about you. I know that you've been out promoting a book, which we'll talk about later. But I love to hear how you stand in the shadow of a big tree, man.
Well, I'm the youngest of four boys. My father was Jack Cassidy, who was a Tony Award-winning actor. My mother is Shirley Jones, who's an Academy Award-winning actress. And so I was right out of the gate. I was born into show business. I have been around sound stages and actors my whole life. And I work in the business now, not in front of the camera. I work behind the camera. I did start out as an actor. I was on several different projects and switched gears in my early 30s. And I really felt like I had to create something that was unique to me. Not that I didn't enjoy being an actor, and not that I didn't have anything to offer as an actor, but I really felt it was important. I had other interests that were not musically inclined and not. I had other interests away from being in front of the camera, in front of the limelight, if you will. And I fell into working behind the camera, working in the set decorating department on TV shows and films. I currently work on the show NCIS. We're going into season 21. Hopefully the strike will get resolved. The WGA strike got resolved. We're waiting on the Screen Actors Guild to make a deal. And I'm really proud of what I've done in that line of work. I'm very close to my brothers, very close to my mother. My father had a great deal of influence on me, even though I lost him. And I have my own family. I have a 12-year-old daughter who is doing great. I think she's leaning in going down in the world of arts and music and performing, and so it's definitely in our genes. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, speaking of genes, so there's in the Cassidy DNA. What is something, and we'll really get this component on you. What is something in the DNA that specifically, if someone sees you or talks to you, or that's a Cassidy, or what is it you feel is that's Cassidy? Does that make sense? The question makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Well, I think that when people meet me and they find out that I'm in the Cassidy family, I smile and they're like, that's your dad, or that's, and so, and I also think that just my father was incredibly talented. My mother is incredibly talented. And my father wasn't just a performer on the stage and in film and in television, but he was a writer. He was a designer in his own right. He was an incredible dresser. He loved beautiful suits. And that carried over to my brothers and I. And when I say genetics, things are handed down to you, whether you know it or not. And then suddenly you're doing something and you go, wait a minute, my dad did that. And that's how my dad, dressed. And so it's there. I mean, when my brothers and I say my brothers, I say Shaun and Patrick because David is no longer with us. When we're together and people see us together, you sometimes can't tell us apart, So it's very strong. Gene's very strong, and there's times when we'll talk about like, well, who's more like dad or who's more like mom, and we're a mix of both of them.
Yeah, I was researching about how you love your suits. You're a big collector of wardrobes and costumes and Hollywood memorabilia and World War II memorabilia, right?
Yeah, I was fascinated with World War II. I was fascinated with Civil War. I've had a love for museums and for history since I was a little boy. I collected antique cars from the time I was 16, 17 years old on. And I'm very much of an old soul. I was born an old soul in that I was drawn to the past from the time I was a little kid. My house has kind of a feeling of a museum. It has historical things in it, and it's just a passion of mine. And I think a lot of that came from my dad, because my dad was the same way. He had a love for the past. He loved creating themes with furniture and historical items, and that rubbed off on me. And I'm the same way today. It hasn't changed.
Okay, I love old cars, so I have to ask, what's your collection been like? What do you have now? What's been your favorite? Because I've got mine, and everybody's got theirs. So
I've had probably 25 vintage cars. At the moment, I don't have any. I started out with a 1929 Model A Ford. I went from a 1929 Model A Ford to a vintage Porsche, to a Packard, to the list goes on and on and on. I've had a lot of old Chevrolet half-ton pickup from the early 1950s. It goes on and on and on. My favorite car was a 1937 Ford Flathead V8 coupe. That was one of my favorite cars. I grew up playing in cars as a kid. If somebody had a vintage car from the past, I would ask if I could just sit in it for hours and pretend I was driving it. So my love for antique cars goes on and on and on, and it still does.
Yeah, I'm always wanted a VW bus. It's coming. So, there's so much history in your family to talk about, but I know that you said you were an actor. If you can give us a little bit of some of your career, because at one point you also thought about once not being an actor, but going into law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, I didn't go into law enforcement, although I'm involved with law enforcement out here in Los Angeles. I work with the Los Angeles Police Museum. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm involved with. I'm board chair of archives and exhibits, so I help create their exhibits. I decided after high school, I had been in the theater program at high school, that I was going to pursue acting. And right out of high school, I got an agent and a manager, and I started auditioning. And my first job was the music video with Lionel Richie, the song Penny Lover. And I was in that. I was the lead actor in that, if you will. And from there, I went on to audition for, well, I auditioned for The Facts of Life, which I landed a recurring role on that show, and my character was a guy named Kevin Medcalf. And I was on for, I think I did 7 episodes. I was on for a little while. Enjoyed working on that show. Came on and took over, and after my character, they just started bringing different guys. But that was a lot of fun. The girls on that show were wonderful to work with. They made me feel I was very welcome. So I had a really great experience on the show, and ironically, we filmed it at Universal Studios, which is very close to where I live. And I spent a lot of time going to Universal Studios as a kid when my father was doing Columbo there. So I had, knowledge of a lot, and I'm now working as an actor there, and so there was a lot of connection.
What was the draw for law enforcement to you? I know a lot of people in the business kind of lean that way, or EMT. I think people done. David Lee Roth has become an EMT and different. So there's kind of there seems to be a lot of that leaning. What for you drew in that direction?
I was drawn to. I first of all like working with people, and I was drawn to wanting to be of service in some capacity. I also like problem solving, and I was always really, my instinct was to always try to talk to people and help people through a situation, which I still enjoy doing. And I had met some law enforcement officers when I was a little boy, and they had a strong influence on me in a positive way. So I think that was the door that opened for me, that I thought this would be a great job for me. I also liked the structure that law enforcement offered. I grew up with a lot of chaos, not that it was terrible, but there was a lot, between my mother working all the time, my father being gone a lot, working in New York, working in the theater, my brothers becoming giant pop stars at a young age. I wanted something that I felt. I also like there was a brotherhood that law enforcement has, and a connection that I really was drawn to. Ironically, I have that to some degree now in what I do in the film business, in the capacity of my job, because I work with a team of people, and we collaborate to create that, like a set rather than just 4 walls and an empty room. It's a brotherhood, and that's what they call it. And I grew up with brothers, so I think the combination of all of that, I was drawn to it. And I still, I still respect law enforcement officers. I'm not saying that every law enforcement officer is great and does a great job. And like anything, there are good people in their job and there are bad people in their job. So
I'm normally I've been a film and television producer, nowhere near the level of your brothers, but I also got to work in the art department on Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, the James L. Brooks film recently. And it really opened my eyes to what you do. And a lot of people, they don't understand what you do. I'd love to hear some of your history in the art department, in the set design, and set dresser. I mean, that, behind the scenes people just think it magically happens, right?
Yeah. So what I do is I'm hired by, first of all, there's a production designer who actually designs the actual set. And then there's a set designer who creates the blueprint for what the set's going to look like on paper. And then the decorator gets hired. The decorator goes and picks out the items that are going to go in the set. And the set dressers, which is my job is actually goes and gets the items that are picked out, that are rented, that are purchased, and we actually physically dress it in the set. Once the set is shot, we return it because in many cases it's rented, or we keep it in our inventory. So it's a creative job. It's I started on multicam shows, half-hour type shows, like Friends, Seinfeld type show. I didn't work on those shows, but I worked on a lot of shows that were very successful in its realm. And at that time, we would shoot like a theater production where we would block and rehearse the show Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday we pre-shoot, and Friday there'd be a live audience. Once the set was done, we would take it down, and in some cases there were permanent sets that would stay up all throughout the show. And then there was a set called what they call swing sets, which are sets that are just for that episode. And multicam shows are different than 1 hour shows. 1 hour shows are usually longer, more hours. And I've worked on both. I've worked on features, homes, I've worked on music videos. So there's a creative aspect to it, and I love creating themes, and I love aesthetics, and I love, I have a knack for knowing what works with what goes with what. And specifically with film and television and with movie sets, you have to, it's not just creating a look, you have to know the character. What is the character like? Would the character have this? Would the character, maybe the character collects Hot Wheels. He's a boy, or he collects old telephones. You have to go out and find those and create that look, and that is a very signature personality trait to that character. So I enjoy all that.
Yeah, I love that. Looking at the sets of movies and television, and make sure, like, is it period? Is it in the time frame? Is it something that works? It's don't take me out. Don't have something there that's going to take me out of the story, because then I'm going to be worried about, well, why is that Cracker Jack box back there? So I admire what you do.
Yeah.
And so you said you've been on NCSI.
NCIS.
NCIS, yeah.
I work on the original NCIS, the Washington NCIS that Mark Harmon was on, and we're going into season 21, as I said. I've lost count of how many shows I've worked on, because I've been doing it for almost 30 years. So, but that is a very successful show. It's still, I think, the #1 rated show on the network, and hopefully we'll be going back to work soon.
What do you think is going to happen on set with the passing of David? Because he was an integral part of the show, correct?
Very. Yeah, I can't answer that because I really don't know. When I was hired on that show, I'm going into my 3rd season. He was only there a few times. He was sort of like, he wasn't working as much on it. So I don't know where that character is going to go and how they're going to make that transition. But he was a really, really wonderful actor and a wonderful man.
Yeah, I remember more from the Man from U.N.C.L.E. days. But I saw something where you have your father's Tony Award. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's a pretty fascinating story, I think.
So my father won a Tony Award in 1964 for a musical called She Loves Me with Barbara Cook. My father died very tragically in a condominium fire in 1976. His Tony Award, when he received his Tony Award in the 1960s, they would give it to you in a jewelry box. It wasn't on a swivel stand, which is how it's presented now. His Tony Award was in a piece of plexiglass that was hanging in his condominium. And when he passed away in a fire. A lot of things were damaged. Well, the Tony Award was found, and it was given to my uncle, who was one of the executors to my dad's estate. My uncle gave it to Jerry Block. Jerry Block was one of my father's best friends. It was Sheldon Harnick and Jerry Block were the lyricists and composers to She Loves Me, as well Jerry Block, as well as Fiddler on the Roof. So they're well known. When as years grew after in other words, after my father passed away, the Tony Award ended up in Jerry Block's hands, and Jerry Block kept it, I think, with the intention of wanting to give it to my family, my brothers. Well, that never happened, and I don't exactly know why. I think it was just timing. Well, we cut to back in, I think, in the 1980s. My brother Patrick had a manager who we were all under the impression that the Tony Award was destroyed. I don't know whether my uncle didn't say anything or what. I don't know exactly what the logistics and how that all worked out was in terms of how he got it. My brother Patrick had a manager who went to the Tonys and recreated the Tony Award to give to Patrick. So Patrick got my dad's Tony Award that was recreated later. We then cut to many years after that. I'm visiting Jerry Block's son, who was a friend of mine who lived in Poundridge, New York. And I was there for a few days. I grew up with that family. Obviously, he was close with my dad, one of the executors to my dad's estate, along with my Uncle Joe. As I'm leaving after I'd been there for a week, Jerry Block said, "Ryan, would you come down to my office? I'd like to talk to you about something." Went down to his office. He said, "I have something I've been wanting to give you." And he hands me a jewelry box. And in it is my dad's original Tony Award that survived the fire that he died in. So I have the original Tony Award. And the reason why it wasn't destroyed by the fire was because it was in plexiglass, and I guess that protected it. And my brother Patrick has an actual Tony Award that was recreated.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. So for our guests who have never heard of James Cagney, I suggest you Google this famous actor. I love James Cagney. I worked at a restaurant, had a big, huge mural of him on the wall. And you've written a book called James Cagney Was My Babysitter. Fascinating. I want to hear the story.
My mom did a movie with James Cagney in 1957 called Never Steal Anything Small. So my mother knew him and had stayed friends with him through the years. My father and my mother got together with them periodically. They had dinner. I say them, James Cagney and his wife. Her name was Billy. Well, in 1973, my mother and father were separated. And my father picked me up. He was living in a rented house, and he said, "Son, I'm gonna take you to the movies, or I don't remember where he said he was gonna take me." And he said, "But I first have to stop by the Cagney's house," and at that time they lived in Beverly Hills on Coldwater Canyon. And I said, "Okay." I didn't really know who James Cagney was, except that he was an actor and that he'd done a movie with my mother. Well, we went to his house, and my father got on a phone call, or not a phone call. I think he had called when we got to the Cagney's house. He called my mother. He called somebody, and he had to abruptly. He was going to take me back home because he had to go visit. Something came up, and he couldn't. I couldn't stay with him. Well, Mr. Cagney had told my dad, Jack, why don't you leave your son Ryan here, and when you're done with whatever personal business you have, come back and get him. So I ended up staying at Cagney's house for about 4 hours that afternoon, and was kind of in awe of him. He was an incredibly sweet man, very warm. He was very personable in that he made you feel like you were the most important person in that room. And he didn't want to talk about himself. He wanted to get to know me. I sat in his living room. His house was very magical in how it was decorated, a lot of beautiful antiques. And let me just first backtrack for a minute, because when I was at people's homes that I didn't know, I was very uncomfortable. I grew up with a perfectionist father, and I didn't want to mess anything up. And my dad, I didn't want to get in trouble because my father was a perfectionist, and I was always like, oh God, I don't want to mess anything up. Well, when I was sitting in Mr. Cagney's living room, I remember him just making me feel very comfortable and wanting to get to know me. He asked me what my interests were. He asked me, my hobbies, and we had a conversation. And I suddenly felt like I was talking to somebody that was on my level. He was a much older man. He was in his 70s, and he brought out a pen and a pad and some crayons and he said, let's draw. And he drew a picture for me. He had these magical inlaid dioramas that were built in the wall of these puppets. And I asked them what they were, and they were made by a studio model maker. And one of them, what looked like what I thought was Rumpelstiltskin, was one of the dwarfs from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I asked him to draw me one of the dwarfs, and he did. Turned out to be like a dancing gnome in the forest. Well, I kept that drawing. He signed it to me. And through the years, I would stare at it. I thought, people would always ask me, who's the most important person, or the most important actor, or the most famous actor you've ever met? And I'd always say, well, I spent the afternoon with James Cagney. So I would look at this drawing and think, something I'd like to write a short story about this in a way that really describes the connection that I had with him. And my father ended up picking me up several hours later. He brought my brother, Patrick. It turned out that my dad had to go visit my brother, Patrick, who was at the doctor and had to be picked up at the last minute. And he didn't want to take me. He didn't, for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why. I never really couldn't pinpoint what the specifics were of why I was there, except that my brother, Patrick, ended up coming back to pick me up. And that's the story. The house is still there. I recently took my daughter there, and I met the new owner. The house was, Mr. Cagney had it built in 1939, and it was an amazing day. And I wrote a book called James Cagney Was My Babysitter. And it's a marvelous book, and that's the cover. So,
You get a copy and read it.
And there's the drawing, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It does look kind of like a dancing gnome.
Yeah. So
we could go on for hours. I want to be conscious of your time. But I do have one question I'd like to end each interview with, and that is, what did I not ask, or what did we not cover? Because there's a ton of stuff we didn't cover. But what did I not ask, or what did we not cover that you really would like to share?
I'm really proud of my family. I'm really proud of what I do. And in many cases, when we are born into a big family, whether it be a family that's successful in the retail business or the whatever business, it's important to establish your own identity and be okay with who you are at no matter what. And people would say to me through the years that it must have been really hard being the youngest of all these very well-known people. And the truth is that, we create our own destiny, and I'm happy with who I am today. And dream was to always have a daughter, and I have an amazing 12-year-old daughter. And if there was the most important job really in the world for me is giving back to her, providing for her, and being an example to her. And that's kind of, where I'm at with it. My mother was from a small town in Charlotte, Pennsylvania, a little town called Houston. She raised my brothers and I with very simplistic values, and there was fame and fortune wasn't what was important to my mother. What was important to my mother was values and family and being an example. And so if there's anything I can leave this conversation with, it's that's the most important thing to me now as a man who's 50s, the youngest of 4 people in show business, both parents in show business. And I'm proud of my family, and I'll always be proud of my family.
Well, Ryan, I certainly appreciate you being with us today. Again, we could go on and on. Perhaps we'll get you back on the show. Maybe we'll do a family with all 3 of the brothers, and really let the competition come out of who's going to overstep who. But I thank you for your time today, and look forward to seeing you again. And
thank you.
Viewers, be sure to check out James Cagney Was My Babysitter. Look up Jack Cassidy, Shirley Jones. Look up the whole family. It's an amazing family.
Well, I'm honored that you asked me to be a guest, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. We will see you again soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you later.
I'd like to thank our partner, Nelco Media, for making this happen today, for being our partners in Relatively Famous. Otherwise, I'd be sitting at home going, man, I wish I could do a podcast. Whether you happen to stumble across us while surfing the internet, or you heard about us, or you're an avid follower, I am humbled and truly grateful that you're with us, that you continue to watch. Follow us on all our social media outlets. Be sure to, if you like what you see, share it with your friends, your coworkers, and more importantly, share it with your family. And hey, if you know someone famous who's got a relative, give us a holler. Certainly appreciate it. And again, thanks, Ryan.
You've been listening to Relatively Famous with Chip White. Please like and subscribe to Relatively Famous with Chip White.